4,000 years ago, someone buried these bodies in boat-shaped coffins beneath the Taklamakan Desert. They were dressed in tartan wool and adorned with necklaces made from hardened cheese. Their hair was reddish-brown and their features looked unmistakably European. But they were in Western China, thousands of years before the Silk Road ever existed. For a century, no one could explain who they were. Then their DNA overturned every theory and revealed something far stranger than migration. The first explorers who stumbled across the Tarim mummies found themselves staring at bodies that looked as if they had only just been laid to rest. Skin stretched tight across high cheekbones, lips still sealed, eyelashes dusted with desert sand. Reddish-brown hair, sometimes braided, spilled onto woolen shrouds woven in a pattern of intersecting lines. Tartan, in colors that had not faded after 4 millennia. Each figure wore leather boots with pointed toes, the seams stitched in zigzag patterns, the soles still supple from the dry air. Around their necks, a string of amber-toned beads, cheese hardened by time, each disc still holding the faint trace of milk proteins, preserved. The graves themselves defied expectation. Coffins shaped like boats, carved from a single trunk, set deep into the sand. Oar-shaped markers rose above the burial mounds, as if ready to launch the dead on a final journey across a vanished sea. Cowhides stretched over the bodies, sealing them from the world. Inside, grave goods lay in perfect order. Limestone loom weights incised with sunray motifs, fragments of woolen ribbons, and tiny leather pouches stitched with care. The colors, the textures, the smell of lanolin and leather, every detail preserved as if the desert had pressed pause on time. Yet for all their clarity, the mummies offered no answers. Their faces looked out of place, their clothes unfamiliar, their rituals untranslatable. The question of who they were and how they came to rest here, in the heart of the Taklamakan, remained as stark and unsolved as the desert itself. Early records from the Tarim Basin read like dispatches from another world. Sven Hedin, the Swedish explorer, scribbled in his field diary about bodies with blonde hair and high noses, lying undisturbed in the desert, their features so distinct from the Turkic villagers nearby. His notes, archived today in Stockholm, detail not only the faces but the setting, burial grounds mapped with precise sketches, coffins shaped like boats, and grave markers rising like oars from the sand. Orel Stein, the British archaeologist, added thousands of glass plate photographs and expedition reports, images that captured the mummies' hair, clothing, and the odd geometry of their resting places. These visual records, now catalogued in the Royal Geographical Society and British Library, gave the world its first look at the Xiaohe Cemetery and the surrounding burial sites. Radiocarbon tests, first run in the late 20th century and refined over the decades, fixed the age of the oldest graves at Kalregul and Xiaohe between 2135 BCE and 1623 BCE. Site maps from early Chinese excavations charted 167 pits at Xiaohe alone, each one filled with artifacts and remains that seemed out of place in the heart of the Taklamakan. Yet, for all the detail, diary entries, site plans, and photographs, none of these records could explain how a population with such unfamiliar features and customs ended up here. The evidence pointed in every direction at once, inviting speculation but offering no answers. The mystery deepened as scholars tried to fit the archival puzzle pieces together. The next step would demand something more than observation, a full confrontation with competing theories about who these people really were. 3 theories once competed to explain the origins of the Tarim mummies, each gathering evidence and political weight. The Afanasievo model traced the mummies to Bronze Age steppe herders from the Altai Scion, citing Kurgan burial mounds, bronze ornaments, and woolen textiles that matched steppe finds. Linguists linked the Tocharian languages, later discovered in Tarim manuscripts, to the Indo-European family, reinforcing the idea of a Western migration. Craniometric measurements, skull shapes, and facial angles were used to bolster the steppe connection, making Afanasievo the favored narrative in museum displays and popular accounts. A second theory looked south to the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, BMAC, focusing on trade goods like carnelian beads, lapis lazuli, and painted ceramics that mirrored those from ancient Turkmenistan. This model argued for cultural diffusion through merchants and artisans rather than conquest, painting the Tarim as a crossroads of exchange. The third theory emphasized the Inner Asian Mountain Corridor, EAMC, and the Tian Shan and Altai passes as ancient highways. Early domestication of horses and yaks, along with mountain fauna in Tarim graves, suggested a corridor of movement and exchange linking the steppe and desert oases. Each theory was quickly adopted by different groups. Afanasyevo was taken up by those claiming a lost European civilization in Asia. BMAC and IAMC were embraced by Uyghur nationalists stressing local roots. Museums, wary of political fallout, sometimes removed references to European features. In 2011, a major exhibition was cancelled after debates over its potential to inflame ethnic tensions. The question of the Tarim people's origins became a political impasse, waiting for science to tip the scales. Permits for sampling were not granted lightly. Yanqiu Kui and her team spent years negotiating with the Xinjiang Cultural Relics Bureau, submitting detailed research plans and agreeing to strict limits on how many remains could be exported. In the end, the team received approval to sample 13 individuals from the Tarim Basin, 11 from the Xiaohe Cemetery, and 2 from nearby sites, plus 5 more from the Dzungarian Basin to the north. Each bone was logged, bar-coded, and sealed in temperature-controlled containers, with a signed chain of custody form tracking every handoff from the desert to the laboratory. Inside the ancient DNA facility in Urumqi, the process began with surface decontamination and ultraviolet irradiation. Technicians drilled bone powder under laminar flow hoods, working in full-body suits to keep modern DNA out. The samples underwent partial UDG treatment, a step that preserves just enough damage to authenticate ancient origin while repairing most errors. Every extraction included negative controls to catch possible contamination, and every library was double-indexed for precise tracking. Sequencing libraries were prepared and amplified, then sent to the Max Planck Institute for independent replication. There, a second team repeated the entire workflow, blind to the original results. Both labs deposited their raw sequence data in the European Nucleotide Archive, making every step traceable and open for scrutiny. Throughout, even small setbacks like a spike in contamination or a failed thermal cycler triggered emergency meetings and immediate corrective action. Replication at an external lab, transparent archiving, and open data access became the backbone of the project's credibility. By the time the team was ready to analyze ancestry, every safeguard had been put in place to ensure the findings would stand up to the closest inspection. The DNA verdict arrived as a shock to every theory on the table. When the genome-wide results came back, the numbers were impossible to ignore. 72% of the ancestry in the Tarim mummies traced back to ancient North Eurasians, a group represented by the 24,000-year-old Afantova Gora, 3 skeleton from Siberia. The remaining 28% matched an ancient Northeast Asian population, not Afanasyevo herders, not BMAC traders, not mountain corridor migrants. Statistical models hammered the point home. In QP8M tests, every attempt to fit Afanasyevo, BMAC, or IAMC as a source failed, with p-values plunging well below accepted thresholds. Principal component analysis showed the Tarim individuals clustering tightly, far from the steppe and southern groups, forming a genetic island in the heart of Eurasia. The evidence left no room for the old migration stories. The faces in the desert were not lost Europeans, not steppe invaders, but the last isolated descendants of an Ice Age lineage that survived where all others vanished. For the scientists, it was a verdict that overturned a century of speculation in a single, unambiguous result. The DNA evidence draws a sharp boundary around the Tarim mummies, a population so genetically isolated that their genomes carry long, uninterrupted stretches of identical DNA, a sign of a severe bottleneck and generations of marriage within a small group. Yet, their world was anything but closed. Wheat, barley, and millet appear side by side in burial offerings, crops that first grew thousands of miles apart. Their clothes are woven in diagonal twill, a textile technology that traveled across continents, and their irrigation canals snake through the desert, channeling water with an engineering precision seen in distant civilizations. Even the cheese beads strung around their necks point to dairy traditions shared with steppe herders far to the west. Archaeobotanical remains, textile fragments, and canal layouts all tell the same story. The Tarim people adopted ideas and tools from neighbors without genetic mixing. Today, traces of ancient North Eurasian ancestry linger in scattered pockets from Siberia to the Americas, but nowhere else did this lineage persist so purely. The Tarim Basin stands as proof that culture can leap across barriers that genes cannot, challenging every assumption about how identity and innovation move through history. Today, the Tarim mummies remind us. Culture travels farther than blood. Genetics may map our origins, but ideas cross boundaries no DNA can mark. As nations debate identity, their story warns. What we look like reveals little about who we become. The Silk Road's real legacy is connection, not descent.